out there. So when you think about one out of every 10 is native to agriculture, involved in agriculture, that's pretty significant. And it's pretty significant to make sure that when you're choosing something that you're going to go into, that there's plenty of opportunity to find a job and to find a decent paying job in that area. That's a real important thing. I always tell everybody how when I was in junior high, I'm a big basketball fan. I love basketball. When I was in junior high, I was a starting point guard on a basketball team. And then in high school, I was a starting point guard. And when I got to high school, I noticed that the varsity team had some really big guys. I went to Santa Maria High School over on the coast, and the starting center on the varsity team when I was a freshman was 6'11". And the other starting forward was 6'8". And the one guy went to Cal, the other guy went to Utah, and played major college basketball. I was 5'5". I'm still 5'5". I love basketball. You know, they always talk about doing something you love. I love basketball. But reality sets in after a while. There's loving it, and can you make a living? Can you survive for your family doing what you love? You have to find some other, I also like livestock and like animal science. And I kind of found a way that I could be a high school ag teacher and make a good living and provide for my family and get good benefits and have a retirement plan and make sure that I could make a lot more than my dad did, which was when he came from the Azores, he was making $1.25 an hour. That was minimum wage in 1960. So you have to have a little bit of reality check. People talk about doing what you love. You want to do what you love, but you want to do what you can make a living. That's kind of pretty important. You know, your wife or your husband might want, like that monthly check coming in. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what was the #1 commodity in the state of California that we produced? Milk and cream. Well, let's look at Merced County. What's our #1 thing in Merced County? Milk. So dairying is a pretty significant thing in Merced County. It's a significant thing in the state. It's also very significant in Merced County. Poultry, real important in Merced County. Almonds, real important. Cattle and calves, real important. Tomatoes. You guys eat that many tomatoes? How do tomatoes get so high up here? What do we have in Merced County that? What? A lot of tomato paste plants. Go over to Las Vegas, Ingomar, Morning Star. A lot of really big tomato. So a lot, huge amount of the tomato paste consumed in the world comes from this area of California. You go down by Corcoran, Boswell has 2 tomato plants down. So tomato paste is a pretty huge industry. One of the things that we do locally that we do a lot in this area are sweet potatoes. A lot of really big sweet potato growers, and we kind of lead in that area. And then eggs and chickens. Look at those things, they're pretty prevalent in our everyday life. Probably a lot of you now eat sweet potato fries when you go somewhere. Go out for lunch. Some people really like it. They like sweet potato fries. Yeah, I like those. So let's take a look at livestock production in California, where does most of this stuff happen in the state of California? If we look at the dairy industry, we said that Merced County, that was our #1 thing we produced. But if we look at the whole state, in which county is #1 in dairy production, it's Tulare. How does Tulare dairy production vary from what you see in Merced County? Is it the same? There are less dairies in Tulare than there are in Merced County. But the difference is that the dairies in Tulare are really large. They average more like 3,000 cows per dairy. In Merced County, our average dairy size is 1,200. So our dairies are a little bit smaller. There's more of them. You go to Tulare, the dairies are really large. You go to Bakersfield, Kern County, they're even larger than they are in Tulare. So that's the big difference. We have a lot of dairies, but they're a little bit smaller. Come to Merced, we're #2 in the state in dairy production. Yes?
Why is that?
Just the way it is. We've always had smaller dairies. We've had like Jersey dairies and Hillmark, the whole Hillmark cheese thing. We've had a lot of small dairy. Tulare had a lot of dairy that came up from Chino, and they were very large dairies. And it's kind of always held. Their dairies are just a little bit larger, and the trend is towards larger dairies all the time. The small ones keep disappearing, and the bigger ones keep getting a little bit bigger. And that's just kind of the trend nationwide almost. There is, there was, you go back to the Midwest, and there's a lot of like still 200, 300 populations. In California, we've always been a little bit ahead of the curve in size, but they keep getting bigger. Stanislaus County is 3rd. Kings County is 4th. Kern County is 5th. There's down there around Tulare and Kern County, there's some 20,000 cow dairies. Huge. Like little cities. So what do you need to dairy? If you're in the dairy business and you're going to go get a new dairy, what do you think they're looking for? You gotta have land, you gotta have access to feed and to their market, and do they want to be right next to a huge population? No. Because when you have lots of animals, you're going to have some dust, they're going to be farming ground because you got to grow forages. And so they want to try to get away from large populations. Some of the challenges, feed availability, cost. The cost of producing that food. Intolerance by urban neighbors. One of the things that we find, or UC Davis has found, when they come into the valley here and test our water, what do they find with our groundwater? That stuff you drink, just pump it out of the ground. What do they find with it when they come in here? Is it all just straight, peachy, or dirt? What?
It's really high in nitrates.
High in nitrates. What's that, David?
It's a chemical that comes off from like manure and when we fertilize our plants and stuff. If we fertilize too much, it goes off.
So nitrogen, we use nitrogen to fertilize our soils and grow our crops, And in the valley here, around these dairies, we use lagoon water and the nitrogen from the manure to put on our fields, and it makes our crops grow. So when they test our groundwater, they find high nitrate levels. Is that good for us? No. It probably, as an adult, doesn't impact us very much, but high nitrate levels to an infant can be toxic. So it's not good. Now, here's the other part of the story. You would think that it's going to be here in the valley because we have a lot of dairy cows here. But if they go over to Salinas Valley and test their water, and go to Santa Maria Valley and test their water, what do they do in Salinas and over in Santa Maria? What comes from Salinas? Lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, strawberries. What do they use to grow those crops? They have to fertilize. And they don't use manure, they use chemical fertilizers. Okay? A lot of them they add, mix in the water. When they go test that groundwater, they find high nitrate levels. So what's happening? Well, what's happening is they're putting a lot more pressure on farmers to be a lot more careful with how much fertilizer they're putting into the ground so that they don't leach it into the groundwater. And they have found those higher levels in Salinas, anywhere where they do a lot of intensive farming. And so if you go to Salinas and they grow lettuce, all kinds of varieties of lettuce, spinach, kale, some of that ground grows 3 crops in a year because they start on the seedlings in greenhouses, and so they're pumping fertilizer to them to get them to grow. So they're paying a lot more attention to that because they're being forced to, because we have to protect our groundwater. That's a natural resource, and we want to make sure that that water is, usable for generations to come. And we're seeing a lot more and more research where, our sheer existence of being here on the planet, we have a tendency to do what is not. What? Change it? Every one of you, what do you have to empty in your house every day? The trash. We trash up the place. By being here, we use stuff, and then we have the residues that are left over. The other day they had a thing on trying to show how much plastic we use to throw away. And it's mind-boggling how much we dispose of. And that has a tendency to trash up. We have this whole debate about global warming. I think it's so dumb. There's not even a debate. By being here, we are trashing up the place. There's no way that we cannot affect and change the way the planet is, because we're constantly making trash, and we have to do something with it. And we know that every ecosystem, when you go into a stream, you're on boats, you're skiing, you're doing all that, you're changing the ecosystem of the stream. By living where you do, you change the ecosystem around that. So, I don't know, it's hard for me to understand what the debate is, because I know the presence of being here, we change everything around us. We change the way it was. There's no, it's hard to deny. Okay, so that was kind of the dairy thing. We need land, we need wide open spaces to grow and produce milk. And we need, as a consumer, we need lots of dairy products. And I love to eat, so I love a lot of dairy products. Cheese, one of my favorites. Poultry industry is pretty big in Merced County. Forest Foster Farms is here in both Merced and Stanislaus County, so that really, broiler production, egg production, turkey production is big in these two counties. San Joaquin County as well. San Bernardino County is a big poultry county. San Diego County. What's happened in the poultry thing, there's one thing that happened about 3 or 4 years ago that drastically impacted the poultry business. And mostly the cage egg laying operations. What happened 4 years ago that changed that? What?
You have to be able to expand your
What was it called?
wings.
Prop 2. So the state of California passed a proposition that said that chickens would be able, if they were caged, would be able to stand up, open their wings, and spread them out. And in the case of hogs, that a sow would have to be in a pen that she could turn around in. So that impacted the type of facilities that poultry people could build. It affects the swine industry because they use, what do they use in the swine industry to house sows in that it would affect? Gestation crates and what else? Farrowing crates. So when a sow farrows, they put her in a little pen that looks like this. It's called a farrowing crate. And she's in here, and her babies are in here. And the reason they do that is because the average sow has about 12 pigs per litter, and they're trying to keep her from, she weighs 500, 600, 700 pounds, and they're trying to keep her from laying down and squashing these little guys. And if they use a farrowing crate, their average is that they wean is about 10.5 pigs per litter. So if they use this, they save a lot more pigs. If they don't use this farrowing crate, and she's in this pen where she can just move around, what happens? She kind of lays on them and smashes them. So consequently, they haven't put as much pressure on growers on this farrowing crate. But what's happened is that they put a lot of pressure on their gestating crates. So this is pretty easy to understand why they do it. But big commercial operations have these huge houses, and they use a thing called gestating crates. So they have rows of these crates where they put the sows in, and every sow's in one of these that she can't turn around. And they put them in there because it's a great way to manage them, because if they put them loose in a pen, sows are very dominant, and the big sows beat up on the little ones that eat their food. And so they keep them real healthy in this system, but animal rights groups don't like it. So they are trying to do away with gestating crates. And a lot of the big operations have said that they're working to try to gradually get away from them. In California, most of our guys have gotten away from doing this because of Prop 2. So the requirements for poultry are pretty much the same as dairy, trying to get away from large populations, just because of all those things, all the issues with dust, smell, flies, rodents. We have a lot of consumers in California. We're almost at 40 million people, so the consumer is pretty important. In both dairy and poultry, it's a fresh product. We want to get it to market. We want to be close to the market. Milk is a very perishable thing. So it's good to be close to your market. You don't have to haul it stuff. you're talking about, poultry and egg production, is this the kind of chicken that produces eggs up here? What's the #1 breed that they use on poultry farms to produce eggs? Not this. It's called a white leghorn hen, and it's the same as the Holstein cow. These are too needy. Okay, beef cattle, #1 county for beef. What was the #1 county for dairy? Tulare. It's also the #1 county for beef, because beef is a byproduct of dairy. So when a dairy cow doesn't produce any more milk, she's going to become beef. She's not doing it at a high enough level, she's going to become beef. Imperial, Fresno, Merced, Kern, a lot of those have a lot of similarities with dairy. Same requirements, cheap land, access to feed. Now, if you're talking about actual beef cattle like Angus, Hereford, Shorthorn, access to cheap land means that we graze. Beef cattle got to be out grazing. We don't want to be feeding them like dairy cattle. The only time we feed beef cattle is when we put them in the feedlot for about 120 days to try to get them to marble better, so that we get that real nice, tender, juicy steak. Challenges. We've got a lot of them in California when it comes to beef the last few years, and the main one has been because of drought. The cost of production, competing with out-of-state producers. What the last one there says, consumer perceptions. What are there negative consumer perceptions about red meat? Anybody in here have any negative perceptions about red meat? Or do you all like red meat? Yeah. Heart disease associated with eating high levels of meat because of the fat content. So like anything else, moderation is pretty important. You don't want to over consume, you want to eat it in moderation. This is our number, when it comes to thinking about beef production, our #1 breed for beef production is Angus. And it is a world recognized brand. You go to a lot of foreign countries, and you'll see that they put on their menu that they serve Angus. Here in the U.S., it's kind of a highly recognized marketing thing, and a lot of the fast food burger places are even saying that they serve Angus burgers. So if we look at Merced County, agriculture ranks 5th in total farm production. In terms of animal agriculture, we look at each area of the state and we look at our animal agriculture. Milk and milk products were #2. If we look at poultry, we're #1 in the state. If we look at cattle, we're about fifth. If we looked at sheep, lamb, and wool, we're fourth, but you gotta keep in mind that in the US, lamb and wool is a very minor thing. It's a very minor species. In the 50s, we used to have about 50 million head of sheep in the United States. Today, we have about 5 million total, a tenth of what we used to have in the 50s. And a lot of that has to do with the cost of production and the simple fact that people just aren't eating lamb and they're not wearing wool like they used to. And there's just no getting away from those two facts. If you look at hogs and pork, a little bit harder to get a hold of that in California. It is a very niche market for pork and hogs in California. Why is that? We have the most population. We have more than 10% of the people in the U.S. We eat lots of pork in California. So why is our number down here kind of almost insignificant? And we're a real niche market. Where do they raise all the hogs in the United States? Iowa. What's in Iowa or the Midwest? Corn. Their diet is 70% corn soy. And so in California, most of our hog growers that are in California are doing a specialty thing. What's the specialty thing that they're growing them for? Show pigs and like roaster market and we have a few specialty guys that have their own like custom kill thing where you can go buy your hog there and they will harvest it for you. So it's a real specialty thing in California. So let's talk for a minute about domestication. So domestication means to adapt an animal's behavior to fit the needs of our needs, the needs of humans. So we domesticated some animals early on because we wanted to use them for companion animals, or we wanted to use them for work, or we wanted to use them for food. And there are some animals that can do all of those. What do you think is the first animal that we domesticated? Cattle? Lauren, what could you point to me as some evidence that cattle was the first animal? What's a document that would be really old that you could read about animals and their, uses in domestication? What's one of the oldest books around? The Bible. What would be mentioned in the Bible over and over again when it comes to animals? What? Herding? What were they herding in the Bible? Where was Jesus born? Where? Yeah, where? In a hotel, 5-star hotel, in a manger. And what was in the barn in the manger? Sheep. So if you go to the Bible, you'll find tons of reference to lamb, sheep, shepherds. So one of the oldest species to be domesticated was a sheep. Makes perfect sense. What do sheep do? Wool, and how do they behave? Yeah, don't they herd and stick together? They're kind of a real docile animal that's real, dogs and predators can get them real easy. So they kind of stick together. They herd together for kind of protection. So sheep were one of the species that were domesticated early on. So when humans began to have contact with animals and trying to figure out which ones they could utilize for food, you know, it would make sense that they would pick animals that were more easy to catch, that kind of stuck together, and were easy to herd. They usually call animals like that barnyard animals. So sheep, ducks, chickens, geese, even pigs, they're easy to keep in the barnyard. Trying to catch a cow that runs real fast, or a horse that's super, super quick, those would be a little more difficult to domesticate. So some of these species, like a sheep, not only could you eat them, or you could get milk from them, but you could also tan their hides and make clothing and get wool from them. So they started slowly trying to figure out how they could confine some of these animals, and they were trying to kind of ensure a steadier supply of food. You know, in our early on, even, you know, I didn't come to the U.S. till 1960. In 1960, we had our own cow for milk, had our own pigs for pork, had some sheep for wool, and there's a lot of places in the world that even today, you know, have their own animals for a source of food. We're pretty removed from that. Now most of us, somebody does that for us. We go to the grocery store and buy it. And so as we started doing that, we started doing what they call controlled breeding. We started controlling those animals and trying to figure out how to mate them and how to select them for more desirable characteristics, so that we would get the stronger ones, the ones that would produce more wool, produce more milk, and kind of direct their mating, direct their breeding program. Call that controlled breeding. And that's what dairymen, pork producers, poultry producers, that's what they do today. They control the outcome. They control the mating. So domestication of animals really allowed for that steady supply of food, and it allowed us to really evolve. Who has the highest standard of living in the world?
The United States?
United States? Why would you say we do?
Because we are the most spoiled, aren't we? We have the most land and the most everything, basically. Like.
And what's allowed that to happen?
Our government.
Our government. What's allowed us to, you know, have branched out into so many things. So Sunday I was watching the football games. You know, some of those guys make $20 million a year. You can play with the little balls. Shit I used to do in grade school. Play with the ball, and you're making $20 million a year. That's pretty crazy if you think about it. Guy grows up as a kid playing with balls, keeps playing with balls, and now he's still playing with the ball, but now he makes $20 billion a year. We have people that like singing So now they sing a few songs and make millions a year. The guys that were real creative, they started playing around with a little electronic gadget in their garage and developed this little computer that every one of you has now on you. What has made that possible?
Freedom.
Freedom? Yeah, that's a pretty big thing for why a lot of people came here, isn't it? But there are other countries that are free, and they're still kind of struggling. Education is a pretty big thing in the U.S., isn't it? We were very well educated. We have this system that allows us to produce massive amounts of food to where most of you take food for granted. You know that it's going to be there. You know that it's very inexpensive. You know that it's really safe. And so in this country for 300-400 years, people have been able to innovate because food is so readily available. In some other parts of the world, people are struggling every day to make sure they have enough food for tomorrow. Part of it is we have a great government, we have great research, but people here have been able to innovate because the standard of living is really good and food is very inexpensive. And so nobody worries about food in the U.S. Except we see some homeless people maybe are worrying about food. But we probably have fewer of those than anywhere else in the world. So having large amounts of food, very inexpensive, allows us to do a lot of innovation. And people come up with all kinds of ways to make a living here, very and make a lot of money. Okay, on Wednesday, we're going to have our first term quiz. So make sure you're prepared.